Hello and welcome to the first episode of Commercial Fishing Radio. I honestly can't describe how excited I am to start this journey. For too long now, the fishing industry throughout Australia has been ignored by the mainstream and our issues with government policy disregarded. That time is coming to a close. We will be heard and we will be listened to. My name is Dane Vandernoot. I'm the host and creator of what I hope will be a very positive change for our industry. I've been a commercial fisherman for almost 10 years and I am president of the Wild Caught Fishers Coalition in New South Wales. Before we begin, anything I say on this podcast are my views, not the position of Wild Caught Fishers Coalition. If you would like to get in contact with me, email info@commercialfishingradio.com. I would like to start with a thought for all of the fishing families that have lost or are about to lose their place in this very proud industry. The emotional stress and mental anguish caused for these families can no longer be ignored. Governments constantly make decisions that cause emotional pain. The pain is invisible to most, but it is definitely real, and governments need to be held accountable. Over the series, I hope to unite the commercial fishing industry and seafood consumers to give them the powerful voice that they need to stop this trend, as well as create awareness of what the overreaching bureaucracy is doing to hundreds of small businesses, and to correct some of the misconceptions with regards to the practices used in the commercial fishing sector. I will be interviewing fishermen, their families, retail outlets, truck drivers, co-ops, recreational fishing lobbyists, bait shops, recreational fishermen, and even seafood consumers. Now for an insight into New South Wales. For more than 3 decades, the fishing industry has been plagued with bureaucracy that has maintained an agenda of removing, restricting, restructuring and reforming the commercial fishing industry. Each time, more fishermen are removed. As a result of the constant removal of fishermen, New South Wales now imports more than 85% of its seafood. All of that ocean, those rivers, lakes and estuaries, and you the public, are only entitled to 15% of your seafood being locally sourced. Add to that the fact that commercial fishermen have been paying fees to government to pay for managers to take their access from them. Every fishery has a considerable amount of restrictions. Some examples are the locational closures, seasonal closures, net length, mesh size, engine power, and many more. Every fishery and every method of commercial fishing is sustainable, according to the New South Wales government, and yet here we go again. Another government, another policy, and another minister. There are consistencies, however. The bureaucrats advising each minister, and the fact that every single minister claims that their policy will increase our security. The majority of commercial fishermen just want to be left alone so they can go to work and provide high quality seafood for their community. The latest policy is the Business Adjustment Program. The program was lobbied for and an election promise was secured without the industry or the majority of industry's knowledge. Once the first proposals were announced, the industry attended port meetings with DPI with a total attendance of over 650 fishermen and their families. At the meetings, 99.4% completely rejected the reform. The final package was announced in June and comes into effect in July 2017. The package takes an active, hard-working fisherman's access, divides it equally among the other fishermen within the relevant method, regardless of whether the other fishermen have worked a day. The government claims that this will make the active fishermen more viable. Since the announcement, fishermen have had to process the information and rush to decide whether they should stay or go, not knowing how much it will cost to stay in or how long the shares they purchase will keep them working. The mental anguish caused by this process is being completely ignored by the department. Fishermen and their families, who have already endured more than 4 years of unworkable proposals, have yet another proposal to deal with. Fishermen now have until the 5th of August to decide whether they want to take a gamble and in some cases spend over $100,000 to be less viable than they are now, or say goodbye to a business they have lived and breathed for decades, even generations. This department is clearly out of control. They are treating human beings as guinea pigs in their social experiment. How far does the mental anguish have to go before they recognise they have got it wrong? For the general public and seafood consumers, I know how confusing this is. The bottom line, we will lose fishermen, some 3rd, 4th, 5th, even 6th generation. So where will your seafood come from, and how much will be locally sourced when the new rules are imposed in 2017? I had the pleasure of interviewing Mary Howard at Parliament House in Sydney. Mary is the New South Wales Director of Women's Industry Network Seafood Community. She is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and the 2016 highly commended award winner at the University of Western Sydney's Women of the West Awards. Mary has a background in boat building and was instrumental in the creation of the Wild Caught Fishers Coalition and is now secretary. Mary, along with many others, has been in a constant battle defending this industry, writing papers and submissions to government, and is currently working on a book. Mary, your husband started out building boats. What enticed you both to start prawn trawling in the Hawkesbury River?
Graham worked for boat builders Binley and Roberts from Menai on the Georges River. They decided to go commercial fishing due to the downturn in demand for commercial vessels brought on by government policy. Graham gets seasick, so he was soon out of a job. We worked from home boat building. A visit to the Hawkesbury and trip on one of the prawn trawlers he had helped build clinched a new direction for us in the early 70s.
How long have you been concerned with the direction of the government policy in relation to fishing?
More than 30 years, Dane. I've been involved from the early 90s in having to complete submission after submission, defending the rights of the fisher to commercially fish. Trawling in particular is targeted by community members, especially recreational fishers. Once we spend time informing them, demonstrating what we actually do, and then they understand, there is always a challenge to educate next person, educating the ministers and members of parliament in each 4-year cycle, and the multiples of local councils are the real challenge.
So Mary, do you think that there are issues with fisheries research in this country?
The focus and policy of fisheries management is on the fisher and his impact on the fishery. I've written several papers on the fishing industry. My third paper, The Productivity of Aquatic Ecosystems is Reliant on Water Managers and Sustainable Cities, was born out of my frustration with this. I had been attending meetings around the country. Little understanding existed. Even the environmental guidelines and the drinking water guidelines seemed to me to be actually ignoring the importance of fish productivity. There were some moves in research, but they appeared to still focus on fishers' activity rather than human impacts. Chemicals, plastics, our day-to-day lives, living and managing population growth, just the water use alone, the fertilisers we put on our gardens, pharmaceuticals we consume, and the synthetics used in our clothes, all impacting the productivity of our waterways.
So Mary, how do you feel we've progressed over the past 30 years?
Dane, our fisheries management continues to be frustrating, with little respect for commercial fishers and their businesses and the product they provide. I took myself off to a conference held by the University of New England and presented my paper called The Challenges of Wild Harvest Fishing for Food, the New South Wales example, in 2012 because of this. The government's overall strategy is driven by politics and ignorance based on world views. We are ahead. We have taken the reductions, improved the bycatch levels, reduced effort, closed grounds. 30% of the lakes, rivers and estuaries are now recreational-only fishing havens. There is at least 27% of the ocean waters locked into aquatic reserves and marine parks. We are managed as if we are still over-exploiting the resource.
So the latest saga is the Fisheries Business Adjustment Program. Commercial fishermen and their families in New South Wales are under a lot of stress. Do you think there are issues concerning the mental health of fishermen and their families since the announcement of this program?
Definitely, Dane. Active viable fishers do not know if they will be able to purchase the required shares to reach the new minimum required by 2017 to continue to work, let alone pick up shares to reach their historic catch levels. They do not know the cost of shares, the amount of subsidy available, or the level of debt they will need to take on. The amount of pressure this places on families is extreme and in some cases unbearable.
So the program is supposed to increase the security by linking shares to either effort or catch. Do you believe this will be the case?
No. With legislation that accommodates conflict as a reason for closing commercial fishing grounds and a political climate that collects millions of dollars via a recreational fishing fee, this alone threatens the security of every fisher. The purpose of creating a share value is designed to give government a value to work on when closing fishers out of their grounds. The constant review regime being proposed on less than 1,000 commercial fishers who already fill in catch returns and provide their catch seems to be an unnecessary compliance for the sake of it, and unjust, unfair bureaucracy. The fishers I spoke to across the state were very clear with their message. They did not want to buy their jobs back and had no problem with the government buying out the latent effort separately.
Mary, industry has used the analogy of a farmer owning 12 cows and the government taking those cows and giving 6 back to the farmer that owned them and another 6 to a completely different farmer that didn't own cows to begin with. Since then, the minister has said on the radio, and I quote, "It's a natural resource that is owned by the people. They don't put any input costs into it. I know some have tried to use analogies as a farmer. A farmer puts input costs into their crops or livestock. The fishers don't. They have access to the natural fish stocks, which are the right or property of the people of New South Wales." End quote. Mary, do you believe that it is fair to imply that commercial fishermen don't have input costs, therefore that analogy cannot be used?
Let's see, Dane. I pay fees, electricity, water, run an ice maker, a freezer room, 2 vehicles, a shed, a tractor for slipping the boat, a trailer and a ramp. I have to own a waterfront property, as many fishers do. Do I have input costs? Seems to me there are similarities with regards to input costs. Clearly the minister thinks that fishers only own a fishing boat.
Mary, do you believe the subsidy will give active fishermen the opportunity to purchase the shares they need for their desired level of access?
I see this as breaking down the will of genuine hard-working fishers. Small businesses, many generational fishing families will be driven out of the industry because they will not be able to take the mental anguish and they will give in. Hence the process works. Their shares will then hit the market. They take 20,000 and whatever their shares bring at the auction. In 2017, if they do not have the shares, there is no grandfather clause for historic fishers here. The crab fishers have allocation for their existing shares that are nowhere near the 2017 level required amount to be viable. What is happening is a shifting of the hierarchy of wealth. The fisheries most affected are the multi-endorsed fisher. This process already threatens the viability of genuine active commercial fishers, and it will activate the latent effort.
Do you believe that consumers will have more access to locally caught seafood with the program as the minister has announced it?
The process firstly denies genuine active fishers their existing active effort, and they will be forced to go into debt to buy back what was theirs to begin with. The design of the proposals is envisaged that the price of local fish will increase. Co-ops have indicated a downturn of over $6 million, and at least 2 have indicated they will close. To answer your question, will consumers have more access to locally caught seafood? No. This process is likely to increase the reliance of co-ops on fish from interstate and overseas.
So that was Mary Howard, Secretary of the Wild Caught Fishers Coalition in New South Wales. Ultimately, the commercial fishing industry is in need of community support. There are now under 1,000 fishermen left in New South Wales, with the population expanding. Full-time jobs are getting harder to find, so why is it that a Conservative government wants to ignore the industry and remove hard-working fishermen who create jobs and service the community with fresh, wild-caught and sustainable seafood? Seafood consumers, why should you help? Today, you have a choice of whether you want to eat wild or farmed Australian, or wild or farmed from overseas. Australia-wide, government departments are removing the rights of your wild-caught fishermen. It is important that you recognise as a consumer that their rights equal your choice. Once that choice is gone, you won't get it back. To protect your right to choose, you must write letters to your MPs asking them to demand that your wild-caught fishing industry is left alone. Well, that brings us to the end of the first episode of Commercial Fishing Radio. Thank you for listening. Please like and share my podcast, and let's save our rights to eat fresh, local, and sustainably harvested seafood. Bye for now.